gossip column that the Chili Peppers were like a staple of. Every week there was a mention of what Anthony had for breakfast or where Flea was seen. They were local sensations, I'd say.
Flea plays the bass, he's a god.
Their popularity had as much to do with their outrageous stage show as it did with their high-energy mashup of punk and funk. And even back then, Anthony Kiedis had a way with audiences.
Something about what Anthony was doing was connecting with people from day one. His charisma, his personality, his delivery, his intention brought people in.
And Flea's unique style of slap bass and Hillel's frantic guitar playing only contributed to the mayhem.
I remember when I first saw Flea as a bass player, I thought he played like a black bass player. I thought he played as funky as any black bass player that I have seen or known.
It was the combination of Hillel's guitar playing, Flea's bass playing, and Anthony's presence that really gelled their early sound.
During their first summer playing together, at one particularly rowdy show at the infamous Kit Kat Lounge, the band introduced what would become one of their signatures.
Just came out with socks on stage on their members. They weren't afraid to have fun, and they weren't afraid to go to the end for their performance.
That's what it's all about when they're wild and crazy guys like us.
In the fall of 1983, after only having performed together as a band for a little over 6 months, EMI Records offered the Red Hot Chili Peppers a recording contract.
EMI said, well, let's play to the strength of what people are responding to on stage about these guys.
There was just one problem. At around the same time, What Is This? Flea, Jack, and Hillel's other band was also offered a recording contract with MCA Records. Hillel and Jack elected to stay with What Is This? A band they had been in longer and that they took much more seriously. Flea stayed with his friend Anthony. The Peppers now had a record deal, but only half a band. They needed to find a drummer and a guitar player fast. Drummer Cliff Martinez signed on almost immediately.
I was in a band called The Weirdos that was one of the first LA punk bands that Flea was a fan of, so he had seen me perform.
Finding a guitar player wasn't quite so easy, something that would haunt the Peppers for the next 2 decades.
We went through a couple guitar auditions in the time I was in the band, and it was like we'd have to go through 20 or 30 guys to find somebody that was even in the ballpark.
Finally, they hired John Sherman, who toured with John Hyatt and Graham Parker. With the band in place, they entered the studio to record their first album. Red Hot Chili Peppers was released on August 10th, 1984, and was an instant failure. It sold around 25,000 copies and disappeared.
I don't remember being concerned about the sales figures as much as how the album turned out, how the live sound of the band had been altered by the recording process. I think there was some disappointment all around for the way that the record came out.
The only good news was the What Is This debut record fared even worse than the Peppers. So guitarist Hillel Slovak quit to rejoin his friends.
Are y'all ready to funk?
A year later, the Peppers released a second album, this one produced by Funkadelic legend George Clinton. It fared little better.
The records were just kind of a mess. The Chili Peppers were a spectacle and an experience and really about performance and about showmanship and chaos, but the records weren't going to convince you if you hadn't seen them.
It's called Freaky Styley. It's a new classic landmark of a classic monumental masterpiece of music.
The Peppers, now Kiedis, Flea, Slovak, and Martinez, hit the road in a beat-up van and toured the country.
They would come on stage, and you knew that they were there to have a great time, and they were there to take no prisoners. And that was the thing that I think really drew everybody into them at the time.
We're still playing nightclubs and not big concert venues, but for me, and I think for everybody, it was like our first brush with rock and roll success and fame and everything that comes with that in a smaller amount.
They had their first brushes with groupies.
I don't think any of us were really adept at that. Pretty much people were like, you know, stepping over you to get to Anthony if there was any girl action at all.
Even as the Peppers were getting their first taste of fame, their newfound success was threatened by the drug use of Anthony Kiedis and Hillel Slovak. At a gig back in LA, towards the end of the tour, Anthony didn't even show up.
Keith Morris from the Circle Jerks offered to stand in for Anthony, and he just made up words, sang whatever came into his head. So it was just kind of this constant insecurity that you would go to a show without your singer.
We don't need a singer, forget him.
I can recall having talks with the different members of the Red Hot Chili Peppers about Anthony disappearing or not coming to rehearsals or missing studio sessions, and there being anger behind that, and maybe a feeling of helplessness because this guy is off on a heroin binge. He's drugging it up.
Tired of non-stop touring in a cramped van and the constant mayhem that seemed to follow the Chili Peppers wherever they went, Cliff Martinez left the band in the summer of 1986.
I think it was a good thing because immediately afterwards, I guess, things got a lot worse on the drug front.
With the band again in need of a drummer, Jack Irons was happy to rejoin his friends.
He's the original drummer.
He's the original drummer.
He's the new old one.
Yeah.
The Peppers were back to their original lineup and eager to take things to the next level. For their third album, the band wanted to hire the Beastie Boys' acclaimed producer, Rick Rubin.
He had been involved in a lot of albums that they really respected. You know, some of the seminal hip-hop albums and obviously the Beastie Boys and all of that.
But after meeting with them at the rehearsal studio, Rubin turned them down.
He just felt like the energy was bad.
Get the last note, man.
They were deep into drug use. You know, they hadn't figured out what they wanted to be or how they wanted to get there.
I think at the time that I left, the band was at a creative low point, and I think part of it, you could say, was the band had been infected by drug use, and I think it lowered everybody's creative output.
The Peppers' third album, produced by studio veteran Michael Beenhorn, was released the following September.
We just came out with our third record, The Uplift Mofo Party Plan. It is our best record to date. It could be the best record ever made by mankind.
The Uplift Mofo Party Plan was the first Red Hot Chili Peppers album to crack Billboard's top 200, but it peaked at number 148, and like the first two, quickly faded from view.
The records were sort of all vibe and feeling and no real songs, and that was the big challenge for them. I mean, you either bought into liking what they were about, or you didn't.
Let the booty juices dribble down your chin. Woo!
The Peppers seemed to be stuck on the fringes of rock and roll success, and the rampant drug abuse was starting to block their way to the next level, and it would only get worse. On June 25th, 1988, a friend stopped by Hillel Slovak's LA apartment. He found the guitarist face down on the floor, dead, the victim of a heroin overdose.
With the Red Hot Chili Peppers, I'm Hillel Slovak, the guitar player. That's Flea. That's Dudley Do Right.
Right.
You can do no wrong. And this is Swan.
On June 30th, 1988, a memorial service for Red Hot Chili Pepper guitarist Hillel Slovak was held at Mount Sinai Memorial Park in Hollywood, California. Slovak had been found dead of a heroin overdose 5 days earlier, at the age of 26.
No matter what people said about Hillel's drug use, the last thing you think is that like this, you know, ball of human energy is not going to be with us anymore. So it's a shock to the system.
The death of Hillel, really obviously losing one of their best friends to a heroin overdose, was devastating to the guys.
Conspicuously absent from the memorial service was the group's charismatic frontman, Anthony Kiedis. He had left for Mexico to get away from the LA drug scene and try to get himself clean.
He was very well aware that that could easily have been him that day or another day.
Jack Irons, the band's drummer, took Hillel's death even harder. He suffered a complete mental breakdown.
He flipped completely and actually ended up in a hospital for a while. And when he came back out, said, I can't be in this band anymore.
Once again, the Red Hot Chili Peppers were down to 2 members.
And I think it was a very open question whether you could continue a band that was now down to 2 guys, one of whom doesn't play an instrument.
Anthony returned from Mexico a month later, clean and sober, for now. And he and Flea were ready to put the band back together. After months of auditioning